A large portion of the Jewish nation has returned to its homeland, but the heart, soul, and mind of much of the Jewish nation are still in exile mode. This state of affairs must and will inevitably change. This is Torah Nation TV from Jerusalem, and we are speaking with the head of Machon Shilo, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim. Shalom, Rabbi Bar-Hayim.
Shalom.
The standard Ashkenazi custom is not to cut one's hair or to shave from Shivasar B'Tammuz until after Tisha B'Av. Is it necessary or recommended to follow this custom?
Well, let us begin at the beginning. This practice, this custom of the Ashkenazim of mourning practices for 3 weeks is exactly that. It's a custom, it's a minhag, it is not a din, it's not the halacha. Hazal never spoke about mourning practices that last 3 weeks during any period of the year. Having said that, there are minhagim that one should follow, and there are also minhagim that one should definitely not follow. And this particular minhag, so it seems to me very plain, is one of those minhagim that one should not follow. It is true that in one source in the Midrash Agada, Icharabati, Parasha Aleph, Piska Kaf Teth, 129, it does speak about the period of the 3 weeks from Shivasar B'Tammuz until Tisha B'Av, but the only notion, the only idea mentioned there is the fact that there is some kind of negative spiritual power, or if you like perhaps demon, that is active during the midday period of these 3 weeks, and that therefore one should avoid, for example, going outside, walking outside alone from the 4th to the 9th hour every day during these 3 weeks. This halacha, or this notion, is brought, I wouldn't really refer to it as a halacha. It goes without saying that the Rif and the Rambam and the Rosh do not mention any such thing, but this statement is brought in the Shulchan Aruch at the end of Siman Tav Kof Nun Aleph, and I would immediately point out that I know of very few people, probably personally I know of no persons at all, who take any care not to walk outside between the 4th and the 9th hour of the day during these 3 weeks. I can't really imagine how one could conduct one's normal daily activities, such as going to work and what have you, or going shopping, or doing 101 things that we all must do, if one were to take this concept seriously. I would also mention in this context that Chazal do not mention anything about mourning practices during these 3 weeks, not in the Mishnah, not in the Talmud, and also not in this Midrash. The Midrash only speaks about the fact that there is this negative spiritual force out there during this period of the year, as the Al-Sheikh, Rabbi Moshe Al-Sheikh, writes in his Perush on the Pasuk in Violate, on the Pasuk called Rodafea Hisiru Ben HaMesarim. He mentions that there is a Koach Tum'ah, a negative, impure force which exists, which is Shoreh in his words, which exists in the ether, so to speak, during this period, quoting this Midrash. Whether this is a halachic concept, I would strongly deny such a possibility. And as I say, I don't believe anyone actually conducts themselves in accordance with this statement, with this notion, which is in fact brought in the Shulchan Aruch. And I believe further that very few people nowadays actually believe in such ideas. And this, I will add here parenthetically, reminds me of a conversation that I had many years ago with a very important Talmid Chachamim, an important rabbi, who said to me that we need for this generation a book of halacha that brings the basic halachic facts and which is applicable to present conditions and to people who exist in the present day. And I said to him, that's a very good idea, but in fact it has already been done. And he said to me, what do you mean? What book is that? And I said, well, I'm referring to the Mishneh Torah of the Rambam, which to a very large extent answers exactly that need. And he said, what do you mean? Give me an example. I said, well, if you take the statement at the very beginning of the Shulchan Aruch, referring to the fact that there is a negative spiritual force present on one's hands when one wakes up in the morning, and that one has to wash one's hands in a certain way to do away with this ruach ra'ah, with this evil spirit. I said that's an example of something which, frankly, very few people take seriously nowadays. Some people may do it without taking it very seriously, but without believing in the concept, but they may do it anyhow, out by rote. But it's not something that people believe in. I said, on the other hand, if you look in the Rambam, for example, you will find that he brings no such halacha. There is no such concept in all of the Mishneh Torah of the Rambam. In other words, the Rambam, 850 years ago, wrote a code of Jewish law which is in many ways extremely modern and relevant to Jews living in the present day who, by and large, do not believe in such things. And I would stress that one does not need to believe in such things. Such beliefs and such ideas have never been part of the core belief system of Torah Judaism. These have always been extraneous additions that were somehow attached to the main core of Judaism by foreign influences, and they were accepted by some sages, some chachamim, and rejected by others. And nowadays, the fact of the matter is, all people, whether they like it or not, whether they know it or not, or almost all people, are Rambamistim. In other words, they follow in the footsteps of the Rambam, at least on this issue, and these types of issues. And this discussion of not walking outside between the 4th and the 9th hour of the day during these 3 weeks is another good example of exactly such a practice that I do not believe many people will take seriously nowadays, and I would agree with them. And I myself do not make any effort not to walk outside during these hours. I don't think I know anyone who does. And all these halachot are rooted in foreign and very dubious sources, to say the least. Now we continue with the issue, the more halachic issue, the more real issue of, for example, not shaving and not cutting one's hair during these 3 weeks. The Mishnah at the end of Masechet Ta'aniyot states as follows: Shabbat shehal Tisha B'Av liot b'tocha, the week during which Tisha B'Av falls, asurim milechabes or milesaper or milechabes. It is forbidden to do laundry or to wash laundered clothes, or to cut one's hair or beard. Uvahamishi mutarim ipnei kavod Shabbat. But on the Thursday they are allowed to do so, the people are allowed to do so in order to prepare for and to honor the Shabbat. What is the Mishnah speaking of? First of all, the Mishnah refers to the fact that there is a halacha, and this is most definitely a halacha and not a minhag, that the week of Tisha B'Av, in other words, the week Tisha B'Av falls, whether it's a Sunday, a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, or Friday for that matter, which in the time of the Mishnah was a possibility. It could happen that, as the calendar was then, Tisha B'Av could fall on a Friday, something which today does not happen. During that week, these activities are forbidden, but the Mishnah goes on to state, even when Tisha B'Av falls on a Friday, it is mutar on the day before Tisha B'Av, Erev Tisha B'Av, on the Thursday, it is mutar, in fact required, that a person shave, cut their hair, wash clothes, etc., lichvod ha-Shabbat, mipanei kavod ha-Shabbat. In other words, to recap, the Mishnah states that if Tisha B'Av falls on a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, there is no conflict between the issue of avelut, of mourning for the Churban and the Mikdash, and the tribulations of Am Yisrael during that period and subsequent periods. There is no conflict between these two issues, these two miswot. One, the miswah of avelut, the other miswah of kavod Shabbat, because one has time to prepare on the Friday for Shabbat. But if Friday is Tisha B'Av, if Tisha B'Av falls on Erev Shabbat, then by needs we must allow people to prepare for the Shabbat. They won't be able to do this on the Friday, which is Tisha B'Av, to wash their clothes, to cut their hair. That's out of the question. What they must do, however, is on the Thursday, Erev Tisha B'Av, which is the week of Tisha B'Av, which normally it's asur, during which it is normally asur to do these things, they must on that day cut their hair if necessary, shave if necessary. In other words, look presentable, look clean and spruce, and wear clean clothes, and wash their clothes if necessary, lichvod ha-Shabbat. In other words, the concept of kavod Shabbat takes precedence over all other considerations. Now, this being the case, if we think about the minhag of 3 weeks, of course, it has to be the case that in a period of 3 weeks we have at least 2 Shabbatot, and sometimes 3. And therefore, how is it possible to tell people not to cut their hair, not to shave? Again, we're assuming here that people are shaving in a manner which is mutar, which is permissible according to Halacha. I'm not going into that discussion now, but assuming a person is doing so in a manner which is mutar, how can you tell a person not to do so for 3 weeks, which therefore inevitably means that for at least 1 or 2 Shabbatot, or at least 2, sometimes 3 Shabbatot, this person will enter Shabbat looking, as Chazal describe it, menuwal. Menuwal means looking scruffy, unkempt, and and looking in a fashion, in a very unpresentable way. This obviously contradicts the essence of the Halacha and the explicit statement of the Mishnah, and therefore this minhag has always been very curious in my eyes, and I have for the last 30 years asked many Rabbanim to explain to me how this minhag is legitimate. And I must say, honestly, that not a single person has ever been able to refute what I am saying or to explain why it is reasonable or legitimate. To me, therefore, it seems that this minhag must be rejected. If I am forced to try and nevertheless explain how this minhag came about, this minhag, by the way, is quoted by the Rama in Darkei Moshe on the Tur, and is quoted in the Shulchan Aruch, Siman Kof Nun Aleph. If I am forced to try and explain this minhag, I would say perhaps as follows: that in former times, hundreds of years ago, and apparently this minhag is approximately 600 or 700 years old at the most, perhaps not even that old, because the Tur does not mention this minhag as an Ashkenazi practice, whereas the Rama does. So it seems that it's probably 600 odd years old. It seems that in those times people did not shave. There were no electric shavers. There were no Rabbanim who said you could shave in such a fashion. Obviously, what Jews did do, without a question, is trim their beards occasionally. This was not something that was done every day or every week. It was probably done every few weeks, once a month. And therefore, one could claim that if one went a couple of weeks during this 3 weeks period, or 3 weeks even, without trimming one's beard, it was not necessarily very obvious, and one did not look unpresentable, and it was not therefore against the kavod, the honor that is due to Shabbat, to do so. However, at the present time, and for some time, maybe a few generations already, it has become more common amongst Jews to shave regularly or to cut their hair more frequently. It is clear that not doing so for a number of weeks will inevitably lead to a situation of being menual, of looking unkempt and not presentable lichvot Shabbat. And therefore this minhag, it is very difficult to justify this minhag, so it seems to me. Even if we go back again to the time 600 or 700 years ago, even then what I explained, my attempt to explain the minhag, even then is really not very convincing. And I'm only doing so out of a kind of honest, that is to say, feeling that we must try and understand how such a minhag came into being from its inception. But nevertheless, the fact is, even going back many centuries, there were obviously many situations where a Jew, for different reasons, found himself entering the 3 week period when he had not trimmed his beard or had not cut his hair for quite some time. For example, a person who perhaps was on the road, was on a trip, a business trip or something, and he came back to his hometown, perhaps in medieval Germany, so let's say in the 1400s, and he was not able to cut his hair or to trim his beard on the road due to his other issues that he had to deal with, and therefore he finds himself entering Shabbat in such a state. This also then too would have been a situation which seems to controvert, this minhag seems clearly to controvert the Halacha. So whether we're talking about time in history many centuries ago or the present day, even more clearly in the present day, it is clear that such a minhag of not trimming one's beard or cutting one's hair, for example, during these 3 weeks is entirely unacceptable and is clearly against both the spirit and the letter of the law of the Halacha. I can also point out that it seems to me that the Gra, the Gaon of Vilna, was of a similar opinion, although we don't have an explicit statement from the Gra regarding cutting hair, but we do have an explicit statement from the Gra regarding something else, and that is the Ashkenazi practice, which is also again mentioned by the Rama in that same Siman Tav Kof Nun Aleph. The Rama writes that the minhag is on Shabbat Hazon, the Shabbat before Tisha B'Av, the minhag is not to wear Shabbat clothes, just to change one's shirt, but not to wear Shabbat clothes, a Shabbat suit or a jacket or a coat or what have you, pants. This was the practice amongst all Ashkenazim for many, many centuries. The Gra, it says clearly and explicitly in Ma'aseh Rav, says as follows. He disagreed with this concept. This is quoted in Ma'aseh Rav, Ilchot Tisha B'Av, Siman Kof Sadi Zayin. It says, Shabbat Hazon, Eino Meshaneh Mibigdei Shabbat Kalal. The minhag of the Gra was on Shabbat Hazon to wear regular Shabbat clothes. Afilu Hal Tisha B'Av Shabbat, even when Tisha B'Av fell on Shabbat itself, as it does this year, Tafshin Ayin He. And the same is true for a person Avelut, that he should wear regular Shabbat clothes on Shabbat. In other words, we see here that the Gra opposed the standard Ashkenazi practice, which had been in place for many centuries, of not wearing Shabbat clothes on this Shabbat, just before Tisha B'Av, because he obviously felt that this was opposed to the spirit and the letter of the law of the Halacha of giving precedence to Kavod Shabbat. In exactly the same way, I am saying that not trimming one's hair, trimming one's beard, cutting one's hair, etc., during the 3 weeks, which inevitably means before some Shabbatot leading up to Tisha B'Av, this practice again is clearly not in line with the Halacha, with what Chazal taught us and instructed us. And that is why I believe, or one of the reasons at least why, Chazal did not at any time suggest a mourning period of 3 weeks, because inevitably this will lead to this problem of not being mechabed the Shabbat correctly. There is another reason I think also why Chazal didn't do so, and that is because it is simply unreasonable to tell people to live in a state of semi-mourning for so long, for so many weeks of the year. If one takes the 3 weeks of this practice, and if one adds, for example, the 7 weeks of Sefirat HaOmer, when many people have the custom of not cutting their hair again for 7 weeks, which of course creates the same problem with regards to Kavod Shabbat, then you're talking about 10 weeks of the year, plus a few other days of the year perhaps, of fast days, etc., and you end up with approximately, over 10 weeks out of 52 weeks of the year, you end up with approximately 20%, almost 20% of the year, people being in a state of semi-mourning. This, I believe, is, psychologically speaking, an unhealthy situation. I did not think this was ever envisaged by Chazal. Chazal clearly intended for the mourning period to be limited in scope, in time, to be quite severe in some aspects of it, but to be limited in time. Therefore, they spoke about being ma'it b'simcha from Rosh Chodesh, certain more joyful activities being prohibited from Rosh Chodesh, and the more serious aspects of the Violate were only for a few days, the week of Tisha B'Av. This is something that Chazal felt was reasonable and doable, whereas for weeks this is something which has a negative impact on people's mindset, on people's psychological health, so it seems to me, and that I think is why Chazal refrained from enunciating any such halacha. It is also a fact that I am aware that I've heard from a number of sources, it has been confirmed to me by a number of reliable sources, that Rav Soloveitchik was of the opinion. This was told to me with regards to Sefirat HaOmer, and I imagine the same is true of the 3 weeks. In his view, that Lichvod Shabbat one can and one should shave, again assuming that one is shaving in a manner which is mutar. So to sum up, this minhag is not only not required, it is also not recommended. In fact, it is in opposition to the halacha.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the Rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the Rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.